I froze in the doorway, my breath catching in my throat as my eyes fell on a pair of high-heeled shoes I didn't recognize. They were sleek, glossy, and carelessly kicked aside on the tile floor of my hallway. My heartbeat quickened. Christopher didn't own anything like that. At least he wasn't supposed to. I hesitated, the weight of dread settling in my stomach as soft sounds, whispers, a low laugh, the unmistakable creak of our bed, seeped from behind the closed bedroom door. For a long moment, I just stood there, paralyzed. Then I pushed the door open. The sight will haunt me for years. Christopher, my husband, the man I thought I knew better than anyone, lay tangled in our sheets with a red-haired woman I'd never seen before. Her hair spilled across the pillow like fire, her laugh dying mid-breath when she realized I was there. Christopher looked up at me, his eyes wide, not with guilt, but with annoyance, as if I had interrupted something he was entitled to. My throat closed, my chest ached, but no tears came. Not here, not in front of them. I turned sharply, slammed the door so hard the frame rattled, and grabbed my coat from the rack. Cold night air hit me like a wall when I burst outside, but it was better than staying in that room another second. I ran down the street, barely seeing where I was going, just needing distance, needing air. How could he do this to me, to us? Snowflakes stung my face as I stumbled toward the first open place I could find, a small cafe on the corner, glowing warm and golden against the frozen darkness. Inside, I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop shaking, but the tremors wouldn't quit. My fingers instinctively reached for my purse, only to find nothing. I'd left it on the kitchen counter. I had no money, no plan, no home, really not anymore. "Coffee's on the house," the barista said quietly, pity softening her eyes. I wanted to thank her, but my voice wouldn't work. I sat at a table, cradling the paper cup, staring at the rising steam, feeling utterly hollow. A few customers glanced my way, curious about the woman sitting alone, shivering like a stray dog. I didn't care. I had nowhere else to go tonight. When the cafe closed, I stepped back into the storm. The city lights blurred through the snow, a dizzy haze that made my stomach lurch. I couldn't go back to that apartment, not with Christopher and that woman there. My feet carried me almost on instinct toward the one place that still felt safe, the publishing house where I'd built my career. At least I had a key, and maybe, just for tonight, a warm chair to curl up in. I paused outside the office building, snow clinging to my coat and hair. This wasn't how my life was supposed to look. I was the editor-in-chief, the woman who had worked late nights to help Christopher grow his company, believing we were building something together. Now all I had was the sharp, shattering image of him with her, and a gnawing emptiness I couldn't name. I took a breath, unlocked the door, and stepped inside, praying for warmth, for silence, for just one night of peace. The office was dark except for the glow of the street lamps filtering through the tall windows. It was quiet, too quiet, but at least it was warm. My heels clicked on the polished floor as I made my way past rows of empty desks, all familiar, all safe. This place had been my second home for years. Tonight, it was all I had left. "Who's there?" a voice called from the security booth near the entrance. I froze for a moment, then stepped into view. "It's me, Isabel. I'm sorry for barging in like this," I said softly. The security guard, an older man named Mike, squinted at me over his glasses. He'd been with the company for as long as I had, always a quiet, reassuring presence during late-night deadlines. "Miss Grant, you scared me half to death. Are you all right?" His eyes lingered on my face, and I knew what he saw, mascara smudged, cheeks raw from wind and tears. I forced a smile I didn't feel. "I just need a place to stay tonight. I'll sleep in my office. I promise I won't be any trouble." He hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "You don't need to ask me twice. You look like you've been through hell. I'll put on a pot of tea, warm you up a bit." For the first time all night, I felt something close to comfort. I settled into my office chair, surrounded by stacks of manuscripts and the soft hum of the building's heating system. Mike soon appeared with a steaming mug of chamomile tea. "Here, drink this. Whatever's going on, you'll feel better in the morning," he said kindly. But I knew better. There wasn't going to be any better in the morning. Christopher's face flashed in my mind. The way he'd looked at me earlier, no shame, no apology, just irritation that I'd interrupted his fun. That hurt more than the affair itself. Affairs happen, people make mistakes, but this was contempt. And it cut deep. I stared at my desk, at the nameplate that read, Isabel Grant, Editor-in-Chief. I'd worked for this company long before Christopher bought into it. He'd always claimed we were partners, that we were building something together. Now I wondered if I had just been building it for him, while he found excitement elsewhere. The tears finally came, quiet and uncontrollable, hot against my freezing skin. I curled up in my chair and let them fall until exhaustion finally pulled me under. Sleep wasn't peaceful. It was fractured, full of echoes of laughter that wasn't mine, words I couldn't quite catch, and a suffocating weight on my chest. A loud banging pulled me out of it. My heart jumped as I looked toward the door. Sunlight leaked through the blinds, and a familiar voice rang out impatient and sharp. "Isabel, open this door." I said, "Open it." "Christopher." I froze. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't here, but he already knew. I took a deep breath and unlocked the door. He stepped inside, his expensive coat draped over one arm, looking every bit the man who thought the world owed him respect. "What's wrong with you? Why didn't you come home?" "You made a scene," he barked, as though I was the one who'd humiliated him. I stared out the window, jaw tight, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry again. "I didn't want to disturb you, and your guest," I said flatly. His lips curled into something that might have been a smirk. "So you saw. Good. Saves me the trouble of explaining. You and I were done, Isabel. You've been too focused on work, too cold, too boring. Victoria understands me in ways you never could." Every word was like a slap. "You think you can just throw away years of marriage and expect me to thank you for it?" I whispered, "Marriage." He laughed, sharp and bitter. "I carried you, Isabel. Without me, you'd still be editing college journals for pennies. You're nothing without me, do you hear me? Nothing." His voice rose, harsh enough to echo off the office walls. I stood, shaking but determined. "No, Christopher, you don't get to define who I am." He stepped closer, eyes flashing. "You're not leaving me. Not like this. Think carefully, because without me you have nothing. No home, no job, nothing." My stomach twisted, but I managed to push past him, out into the hallway. "Then I'll start over," I said quietly, more to myself than to him. His laughter followed me out the door, sharp and mocking, bouncing down the hall long after I'd left the building. I walked aimlessly through the snow, my mind numb. The life I'd built had shattered overnight. My husband was gone, my home was gone, and as of this morning, so was my job. I had no family nearby, no plan, and nowhere to go. The emptiness pressed down like a physical weight until the sound of someone's voice, unexpected, unfamiliar, broke through the fog. "Are you all right?" a man asked, concern threading through his tone. I turned, and that was the first time I saw him. Alexander Shaw. Alexander Shaw didn't look like the kind of man you simply run into on an icy sidewalk. He carried himself with a quiet authority, the kind of presence that made people straighten their backs without realizing it. A navy-wool coat framed broad shoulders, and his voice had that calm resonance of someone used to being listened to. He held out a gloved hand as I steadied myself. "I'm fine," I said automatically, brushing off snow from my sleeve, though I clearly wasn't fine at all. His eyes narrowed slightly, reading me far too easily. "You don't look fine." For a second, I almost told him everything, that my husband had been cheating, that I'd lost both my home and my job within 24 hours, that I had no idea where I belonged anymore. Instead, I forced a polite smile. Just a long night. I should have walked away, but something about him made me hesitate. And then it happened. As his hand brushed mine, a searing image flared in my mind. A black luxury sedan engulfed in flames, its license plate unmistakable, his face behind the shattered windshield, and his scream. My knees wobbled. "Are you okay?" he asked, catching my arm just as I nearly stumbled again. I grabbed his sleeve, my voice urgent. "Please, don't drive your car tomorrow. I know this sounds insane, but you're in danger." He stared at me, clearly taken aback. "What?" "Just promise me you won't drive it. Not tomorrow." A silence stretched between us, awkward and weighted. Finally, he exhaled and gave a short nod, though skepticism lingered in his eyes. "All right, no car tomorrow." "Thank you," I whispered, unsure why I even cared. Maybe it was because helping someone else, even a stranger, gave me a sense of control I no longer had in my own life. He studied me for another moment. "You live around here?" "Not anymore," I said bitterly, shaking my head. "I guess I don't live anywhere now." Something flickered in his expression, but he didn't press. Instead, he handed me a business card. Alexander Shaw, Shaw Media Group. I blinked. I had heard the name. Everyone in publishing had. He was one of those elusive figures who quietly controlled half the city's media networks. "If you ever need work," he said, almost reluctantly, "call me." I nodded, pocketing the card without any intention of using it. I didn't want charity from a stranger. I just wanted my life back. But deep down, some small part of me wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was the first piece of something new. By evening, I was packing what little I had left into a small duffel. Christopher had already changed the locks on our apartment. I'd returned only to find a locksmith van outside and a stranger holding my key back to me with an apologetic shrug. No entry, no belongings, no home. So I stood in the cold hallway, staring at the door that had once been mine, and made a decision. I still had one place left, one last connection to something pure, untouched by betrayal. My grandmother's old house in Carmel by the Sea. It had been years since I'd been there, but at least it was mine. The trip was long, the weather brutal. By the time I arrived, night had fallen, and the small coastal town was quiet, wrapped in the sound of crashing waves and distant gulls. The house was just as I remembered. Weathered wood, peeling paint, a small porch sagging under years of neglect. But stepping inside felt like stepping into a memory of safety I'd almost forgotten. I built a small fire, wrapped myself in an old quilt, and sank into the worn armchair by the window. For the first time in days, the tears came freely, messy, heavy, cleansing. I let them. I didn't have Christopher's voice in my head anymore. Didn't have his scorn cutting me down. Just the wind, the waves, and the quiet throb of my own heart, slowly, painfully, learning how to keep beating without him. The coastal air had a way of cutting through everything. Pain, confusion, even the heavy fog of betrayal. I woke the next morning to a silence broken only by the crash of waves and the faint creak of the old house settling into its bones. For a moment, I almost believed it had all been a bad dream, until my phone buzzed with messages I didn't want to read. Christopher's name glared back at me on the screen, but I swiped it away. Whatever he had to say, I didn't need to hear it. I tried to focus on simple things. I swept dust from the living room, opened the windows to let in salt-kissed air, and searched the cabinets for anything edible. There wasn't much, just a few canned goods and tea that had probably expired 3 years ago. I'd have to make a trip into town later. But first, I needed to check the old generator in the shed. That's when I heard it, a groan, muffled and close, carried on the wind. My head snapped up. A few yards away, near the path leading to the beach, someone lay half-buried in snow. I rushed forward, my heart pounding, and recognized him immediately. Sasha! The name tumbled out before I realized it. He'd been a childhood friend, someone I hadn't seen since before I left for college. Life hadn't been kind to him. That much was obvious from his thin coat and pale face. He was drunk, barely conscious, mumbling nonsense as I struggled to pull him to his feet. "You're going to freeze to death out here," I said, dragging him toward the house. He mumbled something about no one caring, about life being too heavy. My chest tightened at the words. I knew exactly how that felt. Getting him inside wasn't easy, but somehow I managed. I wrapped him in blankets, started the fire, and brewed what little tea I had. Slowly, color returned to his cheeks. He gave me a weak smile, one that carried both gratitude and shame. "Thanks, didn't think anyone would bother," he whispered. I sat beside him, exhausted but oddly lighter than I'd felt in days. Helping him reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I wasn't powerless. I could still choose kindness, even when life felt unkind to me. But my body had limits. Hours later, fever crept over me like a slow tide. My fingers, still raw from hauling him, burned and tingled. I tried to ignore it, but by evening I couldn't stand straight. The world tilted, the room spun, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, everything was blurred. I was warm, though, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and citrus. A figure sat by the window, tall and composed, reading something on his phone. "Alexander." My voice was a hoarse whisper. He looked up, startled, then set the phone aside and approached. "You're awake. Good." His eyes softened. "You scared me half to death. What were you doing out here alone, sick as you were?" My brow furrowed. How are you here?" He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Your warning. About the car. You were right. It wouldn't start this morning. Some kind of engine issue. Apparently a serious one. If I had taken it, it could have caught fire on the highway. So I thought I owed you at least a visit, and I find you unconscious in your own living room." I blinked at him, trying to process his words. He'd actually listened. "I didn't mean to scare you. I could not say something. And I could not come check on you," he replied gently. "You need a doctor. You're running a fever." Before I could protest, he was already on the phone arranging transport to the nearest clinic. I wanted to argue, to tell him I didn't need saving, but the truth was I'd been saved the moment he walked through that door. The clinic was small but efficient. They treated my fever, bandaged my frostbitten fingers, and kept me overnight for observation. Alexander never left the waiting room. I saw him through the cracked door, sitting with his elbows on his knees, eyes distant but concerned. Why would a man like him, a man whose life was full of power, wealth, and obligations, care about a woman like me, broken and adrift? I didn't have an answer then. All I knew was that something had shifted the moment he'd stepped into my life. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and something floral, maybe the detergent they used on the sheets. It was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of a monitor in the next room. I lay there, my body heavy, the fever pulling me under. But every time I opened my eyes, I saw him. Alexander Shaw, sitting in a stiff plastic chair like it was a leather executive seat, scrolling through his phone, answering quiet calls, then glancing back at me as if to make sure I was still breathing. When morning came, the fever had eased. The doctor said I'd be fine with rest and medication, but my hands, fingers stiff and aching, would take time to heal. I stared at the bandages, frustrated by my own fragility. I'd always prided myself on handling everything, on never needing anyone. Now here I was, unable to button my own coat without help. Alexander stepped closer, his expression softening as he noticed my struggle. "Let me," he said quietly, pulling the coat gently around my shoulders. His voice carried no judgment, just an even calm that made me want to cry for reasons I didn't understand. "You didn't have to stay all night," I murmured. "I did," he replied simply, as if that was reason enough. "You saved my life. Consider this the smallest way I could return the favor." I smiled faintly, unsure what to say, so I just nodded. We rode back to my grandmother's house in silence, the hum of his car filling the space between us. When we arrived, he carried a grocery bag from the back seat and placed it on the counter. "Food," he said, "and some basics. You looked like you were running on expired tea and hope. A laugh escaped me, surprised and warm. You really didn't have to do all this. I wanted to, he said, meeting my eyes. And there's something else. He took a step closer, hesitating just slightly before sliding a folder across the counter. I run a media group. Television, radio, digital publishing. We're building a new division. Something creative, forward-thinking. I need someone who understands editorial work, someone I can trust. You came highly recommended, even before we met. I stared at him. You checked up on me? He didn't flinch. Yes. Isabel, you're good at what you do. I read some of your work last night. You have an instinct for stories that matter. I'd like you to come on board. It felt surreal. Less than 48 hours ago, I'd been told I was nothing without Christopher. And now here was one of the most influential men in the industry, telling me I was more than enough. I don't know, I admitted, shaking my head slightly. My hands, my health. I can barely take care of myself right now. Exactly why you shouldn't be alone, he replied gently. Stay at my property. There's room, and it's closer to the city. You'll have medical care, time to heal, and a real workspace. This isn't charity, it's opportunity. But only if you want it. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The idea of leaving this quiet, broken little sanctuary terrified me. But so did the thought of staying here, stuck in memories of a life that no longer existed. Finally, I took a deep breath. Okay, I'll do it. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, something proud but restrained. Good. I'll have someone bring your things. We'll start slow. That afternoon, we packed what little I owned. A few clothes, a box of books, some family photos. When I stepped out onto the porch for the last time, the sea wind caught my hair and I felt lighter, as if leaving this place didn't mean losing it, but rather carrying its calmness with me. As we drove toward Alexander's property, I caught a glimpse of him at the wheel, focused and silent. There was something in the way he carried himself, not just power, but a kind of quiet steadiness I hadn't realized I craved. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt like I was moving toward something, not just running from it. Alexander's property wasn't a house, it was an estate. The kind of place I'd only ever seen in glossy magazines or the movies. White stone walls, glass panels reflecting the endless blue of the Pacific, and gardens manicured down to every last rose petal. But it wasn't cold or ostentatious. Somehow it felt peaceful. He led me through wide hallways lined with artwork that whispered of old money and deliberate taste. This wing is yours, he said, opening a door to a suite larger than my old apartment. It had a private balcony overlooking the ocean. I stood there for a long moment, letting the salt air and rhythmic crash of waves wrap around me like a blanket. This is too much, I said quietly, turning to him. It's temporary, he replied, until you're well, until you decide what's next. I nodded, unsure how to respond. My hand still trembled slightly, the bandages awkward and stiff. But for the first time in days, I didn't feel like a burden. That evening, I wandered through the kitchen, following the smell of something warm. That's when I saw her, Victoria Lane. The red hair, perfectly styled, caught the light like a weapon. She turned, eyes narrowing the instant she saw me. Well, she said, voice dripping honey and venom all at once. I didn't realize Alexander was taking in strays. I froze, my breath catching. Victoria. My voice was neutral, though my pulse raced. You two know each other? Alexander asked, looking between us. Victoria's lips curved into a knowing smile. Oh, we know each other very well. Don't we, Isabel? Or should I say, Mrs. Blake? Though I hear you're not quite Mrs. Blake anymore. The jab landed like a slap, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. We've met, I said, simply meeting her eyes. Alexander's gaze sharpened, catching something unspoken in the air. Victoria, can I have a word? In private. She smiled sweetly at him, but the look she gave me on the way out was pure fire. I exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles whitened. When Alexander returned, he studied me for a long moment. "You don't have to tell me now, but I'd like to know what that was about." "She was the woman I found in my house with my husband," I said flatly, voice steady even as my heart pounded. He froze, a muscle in his jaw tightening. "I see." His voice was quiet, dangerous in its restraint. For what it's worth, I didn't know. If I had, he let the sentence trail off, shaking his head. "You don't have to be anywhere near her if you don't want to." I looked down at my bandaged hands, then back up at him. "No, I'm not running anymore. Not from her, not from any of it." He gave a single nod, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "All right, but know this, you're not alone in this house. Not anymore." Something in my chest loosened at his words, but I stayed quiet, unsure what to do with the warmth they stirred. I had come here to heal, to work, to piece my life back together. The last thing I wanted was another war with someone like Victoria. But I also knew some battles find you whether you're ready or not. The next few days were quiet, at least on the surface. I focused on my recovery and the project Alexander had given me, a creative overhaul of Shaw Media's editorial wing. It felt good to work again, even if my hands still moved stiffly under the bandages. Alexander checked on me often, sometimes to discuss deadlines, sometimes just to ask if I'd eaten. He was careful, deliberate, never crossing boundaries, yet always present when I needed him most. Victoria, on the other hand, seemed determined to make the house feel smaller than it was. She lingered near the kitchen when I walked in, made subtle comments when Alexander wasn't around. "Must be nice living here for free," she said once, swirling her wine glass and watching me like I was an insect she might crush. "I'm working," I replied simply. "Sure," she smirked. "That's what they all say." I didn't take the bait. Every part of me wanted to snap back, to remind her she'd been in my bed with my husband, but I stayed quiet. The old me, the one who used to argue every injustice, was learning that sometimes silence is power. Alexander noticed more than I realized. One evening, after Victoria stormed off following a particularly sharp remark, he stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring at the waves. "She won't be here much longer," he said quietly. "You don't have to do that for me," I replied. His eyes met mine, steady and warm. "It's not for you. It's because I see her clearly now. Sometimes it takes someone else's pain to reveal what we've been avoiding." That struck deeper than I expected, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to gratitude that didn't ache. Our work sessions stretched into late nights, papers scattered across the dining room table, laptops glowing under the soft light. Alexander wasn't the untouchable businessman I'd assumed he was. He was patient, focused, and surprisingly funny in quiet ways. I found myself looking forward to our conversations, to the sound of his laugh breaking through the seriousness of our tasks. But Victoria wasn't done. One afternoon, while Alexander was out, I caught her in his office, rifling through files she had no business touching. She jumped when she saw me, then straightened with a defiant tilt of her chin. "You think you've won something, don't you? A new job, a new man, a new life. But people like you never keep it. You break everything you touch." Her words landed like shards, sharp and personal. For a moment, the old wound of Christopher's betrayal throbbed all over again. But then I remembered the night I'd saved Sasha, the way I'd rebuilt myself from nothing in Carmel, and the look on Alexander's face when he'd said I wasn't alone anymore. "No, Victoria," I said calmly, stepping past her. "That's your story, not mine." She stared at me, stunned, before storming out, heels clicking like gunfire against the marble floor. That evening, Alexander returned and noticed my silence. "What happened?" he asked. Victoria tried to rattle me. "It didn't work," I said, almost surprised at how true it was. He smiled slightly, something proud in his eyes. "You're stronger than you think." For the first time in a long while, I believed it. I was healing, not because someone rescued me, but because I was choosing not to stay broken. Victoria's unraveling began quietly. At first, it was little things, missed meetings, whispers among the staff, the brittle edge in her voice when she thought no one was listening. Then came the mistake she couldn't hide, an unauthorized withdrawal from one of Alexander's project accounts, covered up with forged documents. Alexander found out within hours. He didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply placed the evidence on the table between them. "I trusted you, Victoria," he said quietly, his tone colder than anger. "Pack your things. You're done here." She tried to fight, spinning a web of excuses, even attempting to pin the blame on me. But Alexander didn't waver. "Leave before I make this official and public," he said. There was no victory in his voice, only a finality that ended whatever power she thought she held. I stood in the doorway, silent, watching her go. Part of me expected to feel triumphant, but instead, I just felt free. She wasn't my problem anymore. None of it was. Around the same time, news broke about Christopher. A financial investigation had revealed years of manipulation in our old publishing house, shell accounts, falsified contracts, funds siphoned into ventures he'd kept hidden. He was forced to resign, his name splashed across headlines for all the wrong reasons. I didn't gloat. I didn't even call him. Some endings don't need applause. They just need closure. One evening, I walked to the balcony of my suite, breathing in the salt air. Alexander joined me, 2 mugs of tea in his hands. "You've been quiet today," he said, handing me one. "I was thinking about how much has changed," I admitted. "How much I've changed." "You have," he agreed softly, "but not because of them. Because you chose to." I smiled, realizing how true that was. The betrayal, the loss, the chaos. It had all pushed me to this point, yes. But healing wasn't something they gave me. It was something I claimed for myself. I turned to Alexander. "Thank you for everything." He shook his head. "You don't owe me thanks, Isabel. You saved me before you even knew me. All I did was return the favor." We stood there for a while, silent except for the waves. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waiting for something to break. I was simply okay. And that was enough. The days that followed felt different, not because life suddenly became perfect, but because I no longer felt like I was walking on broken glass. I woke up early, not from anxiety, but from choice, drawn to the sound of waves hitting the cliffs below the estate. Each morning, I'd take my tea onto the balcony, breathing in the sharp scent of salt and pine, and let the quiet soak into me. Alexander and I worked side by side as the new editorial division took shape. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was something that mattered, something that felt like my own. My hands healed slowly, but I learned to adapt, and with every manuscript approved, every idea pitched, I felt myself growing stronger. Not the woman Christopher had once tried to define, but someone new entirely. One afternoon, Alexander found me in the library, staring out at the sea. "You're far away today," he said, handing me a folder. "Just thinking," I replied, smiling faintly, "about how quickly everything can fall apart, and how sometimes that's what saves you." He studied me for a long moment, then said quietly, "You saved yourself, Isabel. Don't forget that." I closed the folder and looked at him, really looked at him, the man whose life I'd stumbled into, whose presence had shifted something deep inside me. "I didn't do it alone," I admitted. We stood there in the stillness, the kind that feels like the world holding its breath. He reached out, his hand warm against mine. Not a grand gesture, just steady and sure. "You don't have to do anything alone anymore," he said simply. I didn't answer with words. I just squeezed his hand, feeling the truth of it sink into me like sunlight on cold skin. Weeks later, I stood on the same balcony where I had once felt so lost. Below, the tide rolled in, endless and certain. I thought about everything. Christopher's betrayal, Victoria's venom, the nights I'd spent wondering if I had anything left worth saving. And then I thought about this, a second chance I hadn't asked for, but had been brave enough to take. Alexander stepped beside me, setting down 2 cups of tea. "You ready for the launch next week?" he asked with a small smile. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how confident it sounded. "I'm ready." We leaned on the railing, shoulders brushing, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt completely at peace. Sometimes betrayal shatters everything you thought you were, everything you thought you wanted. But sometimes it clears the path for something better, something stronger. I had lost a marriage, a home, and the life I thought I'd built, only to find myself, my purpose, and a love that grew out of honesty, not obligation. Healing doesn't come overnight. It comes in small choices. To get up, to keep going, to forgive yourself for trusting the wrong person, and to be brave enough to trust again. And in those choices, life can become whole again, even beautiful.